The last festival is the penultimate arc of the manga, and it's longest, clocking in at 16 chapters. And not only is it long, but it's also non-linear. Chapters 99 and 100 play things pretty straight, but chapters 101 to 112 play the same 3-day cycle from different perspectives before chapters 113 and 114 close out the arc with what would have been the final moments in a lesser story. Because of that length and the nature of that length, I've elected to split this arc into 2 different videos. Here in part 12, I'll go over chapters 99 through 100, give a timeline of events, and then end off with a brief explanation on why this arc ends the way it does. Next week, I'll release part 13, and get into more detail of what all the girls go through in this arc, and how it leads into the final stretch. I stopped making notes about the changes made for the anime adaptation when Season 2 started and had tons of changes right off the bat. But I would be remiss not to at least mention one of the biggest missed opportunities that came with that adaptation. The arc is not presented to us in chronological order. This also happened with the final exam arc, but in that arc, each story segment was isolated. It was easy to look at the scenes that overlapped and put together a timeline of what happened. That's exactly what Season 2 did with its 6th episode. The Quintessential Quintuplets movie could have done the same, but it didn't. It showed a pretty close adaptation to how everything was presented in the manga, complete with these chapter title cards which felt really weird in the middle of a film. And so I have to spend this whole video basically putting together the arc and covering what I can before I get into the nittier, grittier character details in the next video. The Cultural Festival is a 3-day long event that serves as our setting. It's the last chance the students have to enjoy themselves before they take the graduation exam and then their first real steps into adulthood. Chapter 99 covers most of what happens during the first day and sets up the central conflicts everyone will face individually. Then Chapter 100 covers one of the many events that transpire on the second day. From there, we start going through each person's experience in the cultural festival. Ichika, Nino, Miku, and Yotsuba get 2 chapters each. Itsuki then gets 3 chapters dedicated to her arc. Chapters 112 to 113 feature the last moments of the third day. 112 focuses on the girls, spending the last bit of the festival together, before presenting their final choice to Fuutarou. Meanwhile, 113 features Fuutarou spending time with his friends as he comes to terms with the choice he's about to make. Then Chapter 114 wraps up the arc by showing Yotsuba's initial response to that choice and leaving it on a cliffhanger heading into the final arc. Yes, that is 16 chapters, not including all the setup that I covered in part 11. That makes it a whole 4 chapters longer than 7 Goodbyes, which already took me almost 40 minutes to discuss. And that arc was a lot faster paced and with a lot less going on. Now does it make sense why I'm splitting this arc into 2 videos? I mean, it's already taken me this long just to give the proper context to how this arc is structured, so let's actually get into some of the details now. Chapter 99 covers the majority of the first day, but we also see a little bit of it in chapters 101, 103, 105, 107, and 109. Chapter 105 actually has the first bit chronologically since it shows Miku getting in some last minute practice the night before the first day. Actually, come to think of it, chapter 109 technically shows something that happened while the prior arc was going on, so actually that takes place first chronologically, and then the scene from chapter 105, and then everything else. It kicks off with Fuutarou sending a message to the group to meet him at 3 p.m. Then we see Nino leading a high school idol group for a big opening musical number to the delight of the entire school and the visiting family members. Miku is making pancakes, Nino is avoiding fanboys, Itsuki is studying, Fuutarou and Yotsuba are running around checking in on things as part of their class rep duties, and Ichika is busy at work. She does manage to wrap things up and get to the school in time for the rendezvous with Fuutarou. Let's keep the focus on Fuutarou for now since the girls are getting a video all their own. He's never had the stamina for this sort of intense work, so he's already at his limit by the time we see him. He checks on some stalls, which we get more of later. Then helps a kid find his parents, which we later find out he did with Ichika's help. Then helps set up the same rest area he'll be at in chapter 113. It's here that we get an inkling to how this arc ultimately shapes up. He's so busy he is unable to check on the food stalls, which we already saw Yotsuba doing. Both Yotsuba and Fuutarou end up overworking themselves at various points, but whereas Fuutarou has long since learned his lesson and is relying heavily on Yotsuba, Yotsuba has not learned her lesson yet, which leads to her overextending herself until she crashes and burns on the second day. Speaking of Yotsuba, she stands in for someone in the drama club. It's mentioned in chapter 99 and then we see more of it in chapter 107. While she stays behind, Fuutarou helps an old man find his way around. In chapter 99, it just seems like a simple gesture, but we find out later that this is Muto, the Quint's biological father, who came to the festival to talk to Itsuki. Everyone ends up at the rendezvous where Fuutarou makes his big announcement. He is in love with all 5 of them. This is the cherry on top of everything he has gone through with them. It also marks the penultimate moment of this chapter in his life. He is aware that many, if not all of them, have feelings for him as well, but a choice has to be made. He's put it off long enough and he doesn't want to disappoint them, so he's going to wait to make his final decision until after the festival is over. While this is the end of chapter 99, we get a bit more from this day on Ichika's side. Fuutarou escorts her out and she tries to get an answer out of him, but he shoots her down with a really vague statement that might be a lie or might be a sign that he's still indecisive and is giving himself a time limit to sort out his feelings. He does seem like the kind of guy who thrives under pressure after all. It's also around this time as the day is coming to an end that Fuutarou meets up with Nino, and the two run into Futarou's family, all of whom are trying to piece together whether Maruo showed up. If he did so without any of his daughters finding out, and so Fuutarou wants to complain. He even hesitates a bit, thinking back to the thinly veiled threat from the end of the mock exam arc. When he does stand his ground, Isanari ponders this in a way indicating that he does know that Fuutarou is pushing his boundaries with the girls and is in a crash course with a relationship with at least one of them. Wrapping up the first day in chapter 109, Fuutarou talks about the day with his family and his father asks him about Muto and then tells him who Muto really is, which puts Itsuki at the forefront of Futarou's mind heading into the second day. The second day is a little more all over the place, and it's best to assume most of the non-Fuutarou sections all take place simultaneously, which serves me better since this video is supposed to be focused on his involvement in this arc. Chapter 100 is a special chapter containing tons of special little goodies celebrating the series reaching this benchmark. But as chapters go, it's a bit of a non sequitur. At least that's how I felt reading this. It does hint at a couple things that'll be important in the following chapters. Iba, the track captain, is back to see Yotsuba. We see this hand, which turns out to be Maruo's. There's a couple girls who came just to try Miku's pancakes, and then we get Takebayashi. That's where the crux of this chapter lies. Takebayashi is a character that's popped up briefly throughout Futarou's flashbacks, and here we see her return to catch up with Fuutarou. This incurs a lot of jealousy and anxiety from the girls, as this opens up the possibility that Fuutarou isn't going to choose any of them. Chapter 101 reinforces that red herring when Fuutarou tells Ichika he's choosing nobody. On the opposite side of that is a conversation Nino has with Itsuki that we get a bit more of in chapter 103. But in the part we see in chapter 100, Nino points out that Itsuki is just as likely to be the one he picks as anyone else. Itsuki has written herself off because she doesn't feel the same way as all the other girls. She was able to confirm that much at the water park, but on 2 occasions Fuutarou demonstrated love for her. There was the scene in chapter 18 when he was able to see through her Miku disguise, and in chapter 63 when he couldn't tell that this was Nino, but was able to tell that it wasn't Itsuki. But what Nino doesn't know is that he was only able to tell in chapter 18 because Miku was already in the room with him, and in chapter 63 he knew because Itsuki had just been talking to him through the wall. Finally getting to the man himself, he runs into some free time, undoubtedly thanks to Yotsuba, and wanders around. We do get this panel of him fiddling around in his pocket where we later find out he has a voucher for some karage that Yotsuba gave him. he meets up with Takebayashi in a sequence very similar to his first meeting with Yotsuba in Kyoto, and the two spend the next chunk of the day together. Fuutarou doesn't recognize her at first, which is played up as a gag, but it's also a sign that he doesn't love her, and that any feelings he may have had for her at one point have vanished. It's this blend of silly comedy and character pathos that makes this series so great, especially when you consider she recognized him right away, despite the changes he's made, and ends the chapter going to her actual boyfriend Sanada, who we also see in the flashbacks. When she meets a few of the girls, she even says thanks for looking after our Fuutarou, a detail only Itsuki picks up on. It's almost as if Takebayashi and Sanada care a lot about Fuutarou and are like former doting parents, or in Takebayashi's words, siblings, making sure he's doing well before he graduates high school. Miku and Yotsuba are partnered up at this time and spy on the pairing as they run into Nino and Itsuki. After their introduction, Nino tries playing the alpha card only to find out that Takebayashi was Fuutarou's tutor back in the day. She's the one who helped him achieve the promise he made and made him the person they fell in love with. Takebayashi claims that she knows who is closest to him, implying that it's her, which pisses the sisters off. Miku was on the verge of snapping, but Yotsuba beat her to it. But before she could go off, Itsuki chimes in and thanks her for her contributions to their growth. There's a difference between knowing someone for a long time and growing close with them. This is also a bit of a jab at Yotsuba since she's known him longer than any of the other girls, but he doesn't remember that it was her, so she long since lost that advantage. This is all to say that the importance of this chapter is magnified by the arc's conclusion. Takebayashi stirred some emotions in the girls and helped shine a light on Fuutarou's development from before the start of the series. But more importantly, it helped highlight that Fuutarou's choice has nothing to do with the girl in the picture. He let go of those feelings and moved on. The person he fell in love with is Yotsuba, not because of the age-old memories they share, but because of who she is now, in the present. Itsuki gets that because she's far more in tune with Fuutarou's feelings than most anyone else. But that's exactly what Takebayashi wants. As Fuutarou tells her to knock it off, she thinks back to how down on himself he was in the days after that fateful Kyoto trip. And now he's become someone admirable, and more importantly, he has friends that'll stick with him for the rest of his life in a way she never could. After her run-in with Takebayashi, Yotsuba collapses and is rushed to the hospital. It's here where we get the bulk of Nino's role on the second day. Towards the end of the day, Fuutarou collects her and the two confront Maruo. As we see the scene play out in Chapter 104, it's important to note that Fuutarou is pushing Nino towards this confrontation to help the both of them. And when they're in his office, he barely says anything because this is a familial problem and something they have to work on themselves. This MO continues through the third day when Itsuki has to confront their biological father. There's a lot of neat contrast between the scene with Maruo and the later scene with Muto that I find fascinating, and it's something that Fuutarou picks up on right away, even without being involved with the Muto stuff. Maruo did everything he could to support the girls. He loves them. Their disguises don't fool him. He has a subtle way of showing his love that goes over Nino's head. And the reason I'm not saving this for the next video is because Maruo has been openly hostile towards Fuutarou. He has his reasons, some of them good, some of them not, but the entire source of the hostility stems from the fact that he truly cares about his daughters. That's why Fuutarou is confident that Nino doesn't need his help to smooth things over. She just needs the encouragement. Meanwhile, Muto is selfish, their disguises do fool him. He's more concerned about making his own guilt go away than he is supporting the girls. Because of this hostility he has towards Itsuki's dream, she needs far more support from her friends and family to resolve this conflict than Nino did. After the scene, Nino kisses Fuutarou, becoming the first one to do so in this arc, albeit we already saw Ichika's kiss by this point. Speaking of which, their proximity to the hospital means they're the first ones to respond when Yotsuba collapses. Ichika rushes over and after making sure Yotsuba is fine, runs off with Fuutarou so they can have their scene from Chapter 102. It's probably between here and the scene with Ichika that Yotsuba wakes up and has her moment with Fuutarou, where he tells her about everything that happened after she collapsed. After being filled in, Yotsuba lays back down, which is when Ichika gets there. Here we see Ichika put Fuutarou's feelings to the test again by making him get her a drink and then stating that each drink represents one of the girls. Black tea for Nino and green tea for Miku in accordance with their argument from 7 Goodbyes. Yotsuba is represented by orange juice because it's the more childish drink, and coffee represents Itsuki because she's more mature, I guess. This would have been a good time to implement one of the character trivia pages for the volume collections. In the character introduction for volume 7, Neji states all of their favorite drinks. If this were the case, then Ichika would be represented by Frappuccino, but doing this for the gag wouldn't really work since Nino's favorite drink is actually room temperature water, and Itsuki's is curry because she's a monster. Regardless, he's stumped long enough for her to doze off, and when she wakes up, she kisses him. She also sees the drink he chose, but that's kept from the audience until the penultimate moment of this arc. We get another scene with these two in Chapter 110, picking right up where Chapter 102 left off. Fuutarou asks about Itsuki, then tells Ichika that their biological dad said something to her. Itsuki spent the whole first day studying and had a run-in with him. On the second day, he revealed the truth to her, and it ended poorly. So on the third day, checking on her is one of Fuutarou's top priorities. We get our first glimpse of the third day in Chapter 100 during that montage of things that happened leading to a single panel of Fuutarou going to make his choice. After that, we have to wait until Chapter 106, 108, and 110, before the timelines converge in Chapters 112 through 114. As I said, one of Fuutarou's first priorities is checking on Itsuki, but she's avoiding the school and all that entails because she doesn't want to deal with Muto. Fuutarou, along with Miku and Nino, run into Muto, who says he only came to see Itsuki. He doesn't care about the other girls and doesn't even acknowledge that Nino and Miku are right there. Which, now that I wrote that down, isn't actually dissimilar from Fuutarou in Chapter 1. Though his excuse was being bad at recognizing faces and not believing that quintuplets even exist. Muto knows they exist and explicitly left Rena because he didn't want to be saddled with quintuplets. So Fuutarou finds Itsuki at their apartment and they have a heart-to-heart. As he explains the difficulties he's faced while teaching them, we get this hazy montage of some of the defining moments that led to their friendship. We get their first meeting from Chapter 1, then with Raiha in the photo booth from Chapter 7, their big fight in Chapter 16, and finally them sleeping together in Chapter 40. The takeaway from Fuutarou is that it was always his choice to press on. He could have quit tutoring at any time. He didn't have to put himself through everything he did. He didn't have to accept them when they begged him to come back at the end of 7 Goodbyes. He did all those things because he wanted to, because he's a good person who wants to help people, and when one of his students, one of the people he cares the most about, wants to achieve something, then he'll support them with everything he's got. So as long as Itsuki wants to be a teacher, he'll support her, and if she changes her mind, he'll support her in that too, because that's what it means to love someone. That makes a great segue to the final part of this video. Chapters 112 to 113 show the last moments of the day. 112 is centered around the girl, so much so that Fuutarou only appears in a single panel as a silhouette right at the end. Chapter 113 takes the rest of the final day from Fuutarou's perspective as he hangs out with Takeda and Maida, one last time before announcing his choice. And it's a choice that Takeda, at the very least, already knows he's about to make. You can tell a lot about a person's values by the company they keep. Group mentality creates certain feedback loops that can create vicious cycles when left unchecked. People who love to party tend to love those who love to party. Those who are quick to anger tend to attract those who are quick to anger. This facet of human psychology is why virtually every culture puts an emphasis on treating others the way you want to be treated. And in relational psychology, it's why having countering love languages or irreconcilable values can lead to problems. In more positive terms, those who cook tend to love those who cook. Those who protect tend to love those who protect. And those who live their lives to support others tend to love those who will support them. That's why Fuutarou chooses Yotsuba. Yes, you could make some tweaks to Fuutarou's characterization and have him end up with anyone. I even saw some arguments in favor of shipping him with Takeda. Yeah, those people were joking, but it shows how small tweaks to a character can create a massive story-altering ripple effect. But taking everything into account, taking everything that they have gone through together, taking everything they value about themselves and other people, there was only one way this story was ever going to end. And it was staring us right in the face the entire time.
If it's multiple choice with 5 answers, a lot of times it's the 4th one!
Rewinding for a bit, one of the things Fuutarou has to think through is how close finals are. He gave himself a deadline for everyone's benefit without thinking how broken hearts may affect their performance during the graduation exam. It's a valid point, but one that doesn't factor into the plot. Neither this arc nor the final arc ever indicate that their grades are in danger. The girls are beyond that, and Fuutarou might not be giving them enough credit. More importantly is the scene with Fuutarou, Maida, and Takeda. At the start of the series, Fuutarou would have been on the opposite extreme end of the spectrum from Maida. But now Fuutarou is the one in the middle. Takeda is excited for classes to start back up, Maida is depressed about that same fact, and while Fuutarou is eager to finish up high school, he's bummed that it means an end to this part of his life. As soon as he reveals that he has an appointment, his friends instantly peg him. We get some indication that Maida still has a thing for Ichika, which I found weird since he ended up with some other girl at the bonfire and we see them together during the wedding. But then Takeda asks the question whose answer was obvious once you actually think about it. Through Takeda and Maida's bickering, Fuutarou relays the main theme of this arc and a lesson he has come to grips with throughout the series. Studying is a student's duty, but there's no need to throw everything else away. When this lesson really dawned on him is a matter of debate, but I think it happened around the mock exam arc. In that arc, he managed to get the 3rd best test score in the country while still helping the Quints and having fun. Takeda and Maida goof around a little longer before Fuutarou heads off for his final 2 stops. He grabs some food and then heads to his final destination for the day. He crosses the threshold only to find the room empty save for a phone, and then Yotsuba shows up to collect her things, confident that Fuutarou would never choose her. But he did. And how this all played out from Yotsuba's perspective is a subject best saved for another video entirely. This concludes part 12 of my quintessential breakdown of Quintessential Quintuplets.